Yes. Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Songs and Sorcery. Today's going to be a special video. This isn't really going to be something for the mundane watching. This is a video in direct response to the whole Chris EXE thing. That I believe the Red Text had posted on their Instagram. I'm a fan, I'm a follower. I've been a fan of both of yours for quite some time. I don't know if you probably will see this video or not. It perhaps depends, but I felt as though it is important to sort of address this issue because it is something that honestly bothered me. And some may say, well, why are you talking about this? And I feel as though it's important for us to understand the levels that are associated with, the amounts of pressure I think certain individuals can have when they're within a certain organization. I don't know all the details. I've seen the stories. I've seen the things they posted, the response and everything else. So I thought I would perhaps give some insight, at least as far as my personal experience dealing with this sort of matters, and as well as my own take as to maybe, I guess, what is to be done, I guess, as far as the magical community. So, for those of you that may not know, first of all, hello again, and I'm here with my co-host, Grimmy! Grimmy's very happy to be here, although he is a little bit antsy. He's not sure if he should be here at the moment. But, yes, Grimmy. You will? Okay, well, if you don't feel like speaking, which is completely fine, it's up to you, really. I can pretty much take it from here, if you don't mind. Yes. Of course. Love you. You can sit right over here. So, first of all, I believe I sort of gave a sort of minor introduction into what I'm going to be discussing. Oh my god, I harmed my camera. I'm trying to get comfortable. It might be a long video, I have no idea. It sort of depends as to how this sort of thing goes, really. But I think it is important to sort of, dive into this thing and to discuss the nuances around it. So, I will be showing, I think, a few things, maybe here or there, as to the things that were posted by Chris, known as Tarot EXE, on Instagram. The posts were quite interesting, if I may say so myself, but I believe, this is something that I think needs to be, taken care of. So I have some notes here, believe it or not. I have some notes, and I have some other things as well. I did some homework here, believe it or not. And, it may take some time to come with a proper answer conclusion. But I want to say, first of all, this isn't sort of a diss or anything to Chris or to anyone else that are associated with Chris as well. Rye and Volga, I'm a huge fan of yours. Love you both, honestly. I love what you do and what you bring to the community. This is more so an analysis, and it is an opinion that I have based on these events, and how I think we should proceed, especially in response and in respect to people sort of make these decisions, because he's not the first to have done this, and he certainly won't be the last. We're going to have some defectors. We're going to have some people that I believe sort of, I don't want to say apostatize from the community, but they sort of leave it for, the more mainstream religion or belief system. Okay, so it is something that's a bit, rather interesting, I should say. So that's the purpose of me doing this video. I just want to sort of clear some things up, maybe bring some things to light in response to certain things. This is a disclaimer. I may say some things that maybe might offend some, but we are here in honesty, in truth. We are seekers, not always of truth. We are seekers of power first. Truth may either come later or beforehand. Truth can lead to power. But many of us sort of dive into certain things to seek something that we probably otherwise did not have. There's a lot of reasons why people would sort of go into the craft, go into the occult circles. I don't know Chris's motivations. He was clearly a Catholic of some kind, a practitioner that believe used the motifs of Catholicism like many folk practitioners do. They utilize Catholicism, to help fuel their craft, And there are some inherent issues I have with that myself. It's my own personal thing. And I mean no disrespect at all, but I will sort of go into that. What I want all of you to leave with, for example, is, I believe, a nuanced idea. To not be attacking him directly. You can, and you're free to do so. If he's saying all these horrible things about us, and I saw the posts, perhaps, if, you guys aren't sure. And yes, I did take pictures and things of that nature because I want to, make things clear. He's sort of, denouncing the occult community. He's sort of saying that these things are evil, foul things I've heard a million times. It is no surprise to me. And the fact that he, sort of switched over to the Catholic faith, one of the huge perpetrators of, many things, honestly. I mean, things like rape within the church, things like, the harm against witches in the occult community, aside from many other things that some might say is conspiracy, which not really. It's not really super surprising. So I would just go into it right here. So he posted something here. Let me see. I actually have it in my notes here. Forgive me. There's a lot to look into. And there's things that I was, very curious about. So let me just go into it quickly here. All right. So he posted a lot of things. People were commenting on it. And I thought it was very interesting. Okay, so he posted a picture as to, I think the sins in regards to the first commandment. And I thought it was rather interesting. He wanted to post that. But it's not super surprising. Now, let me see if I can find it here. Yes. So he showed this image. Oh God, you can't even see that, can you? There we go. So you guys remember that sort of image? I'll put it on here for again proper reference. Sins against his commandment. Against his commandment, all those sin who have not faith, hope, and charity. Such sinners are very numerous, for they include all who fall into heresy, who reject what Holy Mother the Church proposes for our belief, who give credit to dreams, fortune-telling, and such illusions. Those who, despairing of salvation, trust not in the goodness of God, and those who rely solely on wealth or health and strength of body. But these matters are developed more at length in treatises on, sins and vices. And it's interesting, however, because it's right above this section where it goes into veneration and invocation of angels, saints, not forbidden by this commandment. In explanation of this commandment, it should be accurately taught, this is that section on beneath the circle part, that veneration and invocation of holy angels and of the blessed who now enjoy the glory of heaven, and likewise the honor which the Catholic Church has always paid even to the bodies of whatever, and then it sort of cuts off after that. But what is interesting is that the first commandment, let me just go into the catechism here. I wrote some notes. So this is the Catechism of the Catholic Church, 2nd edition, the citation of the Council of Trent when it comes to the catechism. This is part 3. Let me see. This is, part 3. I have it here. Hold on. Part 3, Life in Christ, section 2, the 10 Commandments. Chapter 1, you shall not love the Lord your God. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Article, the first commandment. Let me read the first article, okay? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Contested. Honestly, I'll talk about it a bit later. Out of the house of bondage, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. This sort of also correlates with the fact that if you are a Catholic, well, strictly speaking, but if you are associated with the Catholic Church, you are supposed to adhere to these certain rules or guidelines that are issued by the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This pertains to the fact that you shall not worship any other god besides the main god, big sky daddy. So that means that technically means that you cannot revere Mary as a goddess. You can probably meet her as a saint. Some people revere her as a saint because she's the mother of Christ. But some people revere her as her own proper goddess. But that is not technically allowed because only God deserves the glory and only God deserves worship in the same instance. In the very first thing, under the Article 1, it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. So there's a lot of things that sort of go into it. So let me see here. The first commandment, I sort of read that already. You shall make yourself a good image, any likeness of anything that's in heaven, blah, 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 blah. And blah, 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 you shall worship the Lord your God. And I sort of went into that already. So the first commandment speaks about, loving your God with all your heart, worshiping him only. It's pretty much what that sort of thing pertains to. The issue is that, it sort of goes into that ground, well, he should be the only one you love, he should be the only one you serve. But when you're, incorporating things like witchcraft into the practice, it sort of gets in the way of that. Point 2084, which is in the same first page here. I'm sort of going to be reading this rather through. Let me see here. God makes himself known by recalling his powerful, all-powerful, loving, interesting that word, and liberating action in the history of the one he addresses. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. He likes to sort of, say that a lot. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. The first word contains the first commandment of the law. You shall fear the Lord your God. You shall serve him. You shall serve him. Not you can, you shall. You shall not go after other gods. Okay? Let's make that clear. God's first call and just demand is that man accept him and worship him. This is a demand. Okay? It's not a question. He's not asking you. He's telling you. Okay? That's the first red flag there. 2085, the one and true God first reveals his glory to Israel. The revelation of the vocation and truth of man is linked to the revelation of God. Man's vocation is to make God manifest by acting in conformity with his creation in the image and likeness of God. There will never be another God. This is a small close under that one. There will never be another God. Tritho, there will be no other since the world began. Then he who made the ordered universe, we do not think that our God is different from yours. He is the same who brought your fathers out of Egypt. He keeps hammering that in. So, it's just sort of that thing. So he wanted to, I think, really put this thing out there. If you guys remember this specific post here, I'll put it on this side because it seems to work. It's the one where it shows part 3, that post. It says, you shall have no other gods before me. This is what was posted. I think I highlighted on his reel. The first commandment forbids honoring gods other than the one Lord who has revealed himself to his people. It prescribes superstition and irreligion. Superstition in some sense represents a perverse excess of religion. Irreligion is the vice contrary by defect to the virtue of religion. Okay. So that should be pretty much, self-explanatory. But so he mentioned some things as well about the whole idolatry thing, which I think was a bit of an issue. And I think this is important because this is the part that sort of troubles me a little bit, because usually when somebody is trying to become, I think, a pastor or leader of a church, they have to undergo seminary schools. And some of these people, they go to a seminary area where they have a lot of historical information that a lot of the, higher-ups in the church don't really tell their congregations. This, I think, is more common, I think, in the more Catholic circles or the Christian circles. They do have pastors sort of go to seminary as well to receive tutelage and to, undergo historical education. Now, the thing is, what they don't tell you is that there's a lot of history that is not presented to the church because it would directly contradict and affect what the Catholic Church has instituted. So that I sort of, don't lose anyone here. I remember that the Red Text recently uploaded a sort of a reissuing of the episode where Chris was speaking in. He was speaking about the power of the Psalms or whatever, and then the historical Jesus. You wanted to know whether or not it was correct or not correct. Chris did in fact do his homework, and there's some of the stuff you learn in seminary as well, which is interesting that he made the decision he did to fully commit to Catholicism, knowing what he knows. The information he gave you about the historicity of Jesus is fairly accurate. People that he mentioned, Bart Ehrman is extremely revered for his takes and attacks upon the church and the religion in which it is founded. Bart Ehrman is not a friend to Christianity. He is someone that regularly debates the legitimacy of God first and foremost. And he also debates whether or not the events in the scripture actually happen. He reveals contradictions, of which there are maybe 12 and many more in scripture. Will I put them here? Perhaps. I do have them listed. But there is also something you have to consider as well, is that even the historicity of Jesus is also something that is a bit debated. Chris mentioned something that is called mythicism, and it is something that many more people are sort of developing and working in these circles, that they're saying that, the support for Jesus being an actual historical figure is, I believe, something to be called into question. Because there were many people named one Jesus during that time, but Jesus was also something that was heavily used as a political figure during that time because it was under Roman occupation. And the Jews at that time were being tired of being under the thumb of the Roman Empire. So they were trying to find out ways to sort of circumvent or sort of, usurp the throne of Rome within that region of Judea. So they have this person, according to mythicism, that's sort of propped up as being this God figure, something that is common in ancient cultures, by the way. And that they were sort of using Jesus as a method of, galvanizing the Israelite people into creating, I think, a single governing body that will essentially push out Rome. Not all the Jews were in agreement with his faction, and there were many different groups of Jews that had different things going on. Even their interpretation of scriptures to what Jesus said and how they believe the Jews should be acting. There are many different branches of Judaism as well. You have things like conservative, you have things that is a bit, it's a lot more progressive. Then you have things like orthodoxy. And then you have different tribes. You know, you have the Ashkenazi Jews, and then you have the other ones as well. Okay? What is interesting about his decision to convert to Catholicism after going to seminary and saying what he did is that even the legitimacy of the church in God is being put into question with verifiable evidence that they found in these archaeological sites. When it comes to the land of Judea, for example, the Israelite, and the reason why I mention this is because the first commandment, where it keeps mentioning about how, you know, God took his people out of Egypt, even that itself is a bit contested, because in seminary they reveal, after a lot of archaeological digs, that there is not sufficient evidence to prove that Israel was in Egypt to begin with. The reason why is because they were under Egyptian rule for about 400 years or so, and there was no influence of the Egyptians in the Jewish people during that time. You didn't see it in their architecture, you didn't see it in anything else, which is interesting because during a process, the group that is essentially under the governance of another country starts to develop certain habits and belief systems that are normal to that country that perhaps wasn't in their own. For example, in the Old Testament, there is scarcely any mention of hell at all. And Jesus was not that directly mentioned in the Old. When they mention a coming of a Messiah, whatever, there is some prophecy there. But what you have in the Old Testament is mostly something called as Sheol. It's a shadowy place that the ancient Jews believed that the body would go to after death and it would remain there. They also had the belief that the spirit of the person deceased would remain around the body for about 3 days, which is why that's significant when it goes into the Christ story. Now, Chris knows this sort of thing, I'm assuming, because he sort of made that decision. So he's sort of done the research. And so even though he mentioned that there is some proof that Jesus was in fact a real person, because they would go into eyewitness accounts, but even those things are even unreliable because many people can see something that isn't real. Like the fiasco in Miami with the aliens, all those people there, not a single recording. What we get are fuzzy images and blobs that don't really prove anything. And we know on a scale that just because you have you have white testimonies from a lot of people, mass eyewitness accounts, that doesn't mean for anything. How many of you go to a magic show and you could have sworn that the person did actual magic on stage, but he didn't? But that is what you use as an excuse. Well, this is what I saw. This is what I go with. Now, this is a little bit of a tirade, but it is along those lines. I'm curious because he sort of dives into something that he already knows is sort of, I think, in question. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because he is a believer, as, you know, I'm sure the host of the Red Text are. Right, maybe not so much. I think Rye is going through something a bit different. Voga, I think, if I remember correctly, darling, I think you said you still incorporate some of those things in your craft, right? Sort of transition out of it a little bit. But it is interesting, to say the least. Now, there's a lot of scriptures, for example, that speak against witchcraft. And this is probably why he sort of transitioned out of that, I'm assuming. Because he was sort of someone that believed in God, as I'm sure other Christian witches do. But it's a bit of a contradiction because we know that God denounces and overall despises the use of any sort of witchcraft or sorcery in Scripture, and even calls for the burning of the death and even condemnation or damnation of said practitioners as well, which is interesting because you're trying to utilize God as the deity you, I think, either use for your craft or the powers or the things that they, here and there use for, these sort of levels. It's extremely interesting, and I don't know why these sort of things happen. But there are certain, things here that I believe I wanted to, I think, record, because he mentions in his first post here that he went to seminary years ago with genuine faith. For the first 2 years, you studied philosophy, and during that time, I was quite zealous. But as soon as I got to my theological studies, things started falling apart. I wonder why, Chris. That's because since Vatican II, the theological studies of the church have been updated to include modernism. This is a take that he's sort of going with, because he's the way he's coming at this, he's saying that the essence, the truth of the Catholic Church has been diluted over time to make room for modernism, to sort of modernize the church and to progress the church to a point where it's sort of losing the value and the strength that it once possessed. It's sort of losing its truth, its efficacy, when it comes to that sort of thing. Modernism was condemned by early 20th century popes as a heresy. Modernism is based on the philosophy of Kant, and it basically means that we as humans can't really know objective reality, and so religion is really just a subjective experience. It absolutely is. This has the effect of relativizing everything, including dogma and morals. If you've ever heard of young men who go to seminary and end up losing their faith, this is why. This is also why a great many people have lost the Catholic faith since the 60s, probably including people you know, maybe you. This is a quote he did there. So he's sort of going through the motions here because he's a believer, but he's witnessing that there's a lot of, strange things happening where people aren't as true Catholics. It's almost like a, what's it called? Like there's no true Scotsman sort of thing. It's a fallacy. But he's going based off the old writings and teachings of the Catholic Church. Now, my contention is the fact that, we are practitioners. Some of us are folk Catholic practitioners, so we're sort of utilizing this sort of stream of consciousness, this sort of stream of thing, to help fuel our practice. Now, if we're trying to call upon a God whose word ultimately condemns what you are to use power, what makes you think that's going to give it to you? You believe that this book has inherent power in it, but it only has power if you give it power. That's how this sort of thing works. Because if that was the case, then anyone who would have read this thing would have been changed, but that's not the case entirely. I was in these circles for 20 years before I moved to the occult. I was in church for 20 years. I grew up, I became a leader, I was a director of music, I've given classes. And so I sort of understand these sort of things, and they're very important. But it is so many things that we need to sort of come to an agreement and understand that perhaps this may not be the thing for you. And when it comes to the Catholic faith, the catechism, a lot of the reason why we still maintain these beliefs, even within our practice, is because it keeps us within a certain community. And there are some communities that are so woven into the faith, into the religion, that if you were to disassociate from that religion, you could lose your community. You could lose contact, you can lose fellowship with your family and friends. It's happened before. And to some degree, it's happened to me as well. Because when I, for example, was a director of music, when I started uploading occult content and they found out, they sat me down and told me that I could no longer play or worship God that I believed in at the time. They sat me down, they clipped my wings, as it were. So, of course, I was like, this is interesting. And I was sort of doing it mostly as out of enjoyment. Then I started delving more into it. I wasn't even really doing magic or like that at the time. But it was the perception, the image of me doing this sort of thing, and how I would negatively affect not only the image of the church, but the legitimacy of its scriptures. Okay? The church doesn't want you. It doesn't like you. It's a fallacy. You're trying to defend something that doesn't care for you. But some people hold on to that sort of thing because it keeps them in touch with the community. And this is very toxic and extremely abusive. That is why I no longer associate with that God, and I despise it. The egregore, the demiurge that it is. Because growing up in that thing, I've noticed the effect it has on people, upon the church as an organization, and the laws it tries to enact. Okay, and I will go into that in a bit. So this might be a sort of a long video, and I apologize for the small pause. My camera was running out of power, but I believe we're all set. This could be a bit of a doozy. Now, again, I have to preface that I'm not doing this to slander anyone. I'm not slandering Chris, okay, or anyone else. I understand the community is legitimate in what they feel, okay? And, but honestly, this was a decision he had to make because he had to make a choice at the end of the day. Are you going to lose your community, your Catholic community, which could involve his family or friends or whatever? Or are you going to sort of, push that aside and embrace this or whatever? Because it is possible that perhaps he was getting pressure from the church at some point because, he is a scholar. He's probably someone that's sort of, going to seminary. So he's, reaching the upper levels of that organization. And so when you're part of an organization, you have to be, alike in thought and in action. Whatever you are supposed to do, part of the organization, what you are supposed to believe has to match. The moment you do something that falls outside of what the organization is known for, of what it represents, of what it does, you start to lose the identity of the organization. And so they eventually will push you out. They will excommunicate you, which has happened in Catholic circles. And it can be devastating for some individuals because they sort of lose connection. It's sort of similar to shunning, which is something that is supported by Paul, for example, I believe in Corinthians. When he was writing to the Church of Corinth, as an example, they were complaining to Paul because the Church of Corinth at that time was super liberal or liberating or whatever. They were doing a lot of things even though they had connections with God, they reported about being able to do miracles, but these were people that were doing a lot of things that weren't, what Christians do. And they didn't like that. So they wrote to Paul, and Paul said, well, if there's someone those among you, I'm sort of paraphrasing, and if they are harming the church, they are to be sort of, shunned or pushed out or whatever. And so they sort of use this. And I think the Jehovah's Witnesses use the same process. However, later on, it also mentions that, for example, Paul gets writings back from the church saying that the people there that were sort of shunned or excommunicated started being very depressed. They were having horrible lives out of it because they were essentially pushed away from their family, their community. Paul saw that that was a mistake, and so he sort of amended it, saying, well, they shouldn't be pushed out, they should be welcomed back in, and you guys can work things out, because he saw the damage that it did. This is what pretty much Paul was doing in his writings. But I'm going to go into, if you guys aren't sure, what the Bible really says in response to witchcraft. This is the Bible, the Christian Bible. There's different versions of it. The Catechism, it says what it says. And I pretty much read it to you. The one and true God, like 2085, I believe I read this, first reveals his glory to Israel. The revelation of the vocation and truth of man is linked to the revelation of God. Man's vocation is to make God manifest by acting in conformity with his creation, in the image and likeness of God. Okay? All right, so I know I'm bouncing around here. I had a set thing here to do, but let me just go into the scriptures and shit that I wrote down. And I think it's something important for us to sort of, dive into. Okay, I'll get into the tarot and divination thing if you're not sure, but I'm just going to address the witchcraft thing first if we're perhaps a bit not sure. Okay, so we have, for example, Leviticus 20:27. It says here that a man or woman who is a medium or spiritist among you must be put to death. Okay? You are to stone them. Their blood will be on their own heads. Okay? The person that kills them is not responsible for their death. They're responsible for being witches to begin with. That is Leviticus 20:27. Okay? The next one I will read would be Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10 to 14. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire. Interesting, because there's evidence that the ancient Israelites did that as well, and I will tell you perhaps at a later date. Who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. This also includes ancestry, which the Catholic Church also denounces. I think it is in the Catechism, as well as in the Bible. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. You must be blameless before the Lord your God. The nations you will dispossess. Listen to those who practice sorcery or divination. But as for you, the Lord your God has not permitted you to do so. Okay? That's a second one. There's approximately 18 of these, but I only highlighted the ones that I think strictly pertain to what is being discussed right now. So let me see. I believe the third one, yes, it is Micah chapter 5, verse 10 to 12. We're doing Bible study right now, if you haven't caught wind of it. I will read from 12 to 15, because I think that whole thing needs to be read within the context of how it was written. In that day, declares the Lord, I will destroy your horses from among you and demolish your chariots. I will destroy the cities of your land and tear down all your strongholds. I will destroy your witchcraft and you will no longer cast spells. Guess what? Doesn't work. I will destroy your idols and your sacred stones from among you. You will no longer bow down to the work of your hands. I will uproot from among you your Asherah poles when I demolish your cities. I will take vengeance and anger and wrath on the nations that have not obeyed me. This is something that the Old Testament God, that some people are trying to say is a difference between Jesus and God, and I will sort of go into that little issue as well, because that's also a problem that people perhaps don't even know about. So this verse is talking about, it's sort of in response to these nations that are going to be attacked, that God is commanding his people to attack and go into. It's going to destroy the witchcraft, render them powerless, destroy their idols, their sacred stones, okay? Uproot their Asherah poles, anything like that. This is a God of war, a God of violence, and it will do what it pleases. Okay? The next verse here is, I believe it is, let me see here. Revelation chapter 21, I believe, verse 8 and onwards. But I will read verse 5 to 8. He who has seated on the throne, this is verse 5, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He's jerking himself off at this point. To the thirsty, I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life, unless you're Palestine, of course. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. Chapter 8, verse 8, I'm sorry. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, guilty as charged, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. And you guys want to work with this? Fuck. So there's that one. So these are perhaps just 4 of the, I think, 18 verses or so that the Bible speaks against witchcraft, okay? So that's just that. So let's go into the divination and tarot thing, because any sort of form of divination sort of goes against this, because you're supposed to trust in God only. You're supposed to put your faith in God or whatever. So there has a lot of, problems that, they see in, you using this. And if you are a Christian witch or a Catholic witch, a folk practitioner, and you are using magic, you're already in contradiction to scripture, to the God you believe in. Now you could say, and you guys have said before, read text, that you are picking and choosing, you're encouraging this, and I agree. Use whatever works for you, okay? But then we sort of have to go into, well, then what are we? Because I believe some gatekeeping is, I think, necessary, because we have to do it in our community as well. Otherwise, we're going to have more of this problem. Because the reason why gatekeeping, slight tangent, is necessary is because when you have a group of people that need protection, and your gates are wide open, it can invite the enemy in and destroy you from within as well. Others can come in and they can taint what you already have. That's why things like closed practices and why they are respected. They are gate kept, but they are respected for those reasons, because they want to preserve what they have and what's been lost already. So we have to treat the same thing. We have to treat the occult and certain practices the same way. We can be inviting. There's nothing wrong with inviting and being welcoming, but we also have to understand what we are, what we do, and what it means, and its relation in comparison to faiths that speak against it. Because Christianity is not the only one, believe it or not. All right, so this is going to be, I would say article, but it's a bit strange. So when you go down the list of what he showed, you go down to divination and magic. This is in the Catechism of the Council of Trent. If you were to go to that same page that I showed you earlier, let me see, the one that mentions the section, it is the chapter 3, the life of Christ, blah, blah, blah. Yes, section 2, the 10 Commandments, that's what you're looking for. So if you have this Catechism of the Council of Trent, go to part 3, life in Christ, section 2, the 10 Commandments, chapter 1, which says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And so he's denouncing tarot and divination, because that's what tarot is. It's pretty much a form of divination. He's saying that it is evil and it's something that should not be practiced. He's urging people to come to Jesus, to come to Christ, to come to the Catholic Church, which I strongly urge against, because it's extremely toxic and they don't know the God they serve, really. But I do, because I've done it for 20 years, so I know what the fuck I'm talking about. So if you go to section 1, where it says Article 1, if you go all the way down, and I mean, I did some, since I wasn't going to pay $30 for this thing, okay? You can look these things up on Google, but thank God, because that would have been $30 down the toilet. So when you look under the section where it says divination and magic, I'm going to read that section right here, just for some clarification, okay? Let me see, 21:15. God can reveal the future to his prophets or to other saints. Still, a sound Christian attitude consists in putting oneself confidently into the hands of providence for whatever concerns the future, and in giving up all unhealthy curiosity about it. So, blissful ignorance, just trusting in God for the future, you do nothing else is required. Okay, improvidence, however, can constitute a lack of responsibility. 21:16. All forms of divination are to be rejected. Recourse to Satan or demons, conjuring up the dead, or other practices falsely supposed to unveil the future. They're saying that these aren't really legitimate claims, that only God knows the future, only God can give the future. Anything else that claims to give the future is not of God, therefore should not be trusted. Consulting horoscopes, astrology, which is fairly accurate. I'm actually going to talk about that at a different episode because I couldn't believe it myself. Palm reading, interesting. Interpretation of omens and lots, which is interesting because Abraham casted lots. Explain that to me. The phenomena of clairvoyance and recourse to mediums all conceal a desire for power over time, history, and in the last analysis, other human beings, as well as a wish to conciliate hidden powers. They contradict the honor, respect, and loving fear that we owe to God alone. That's what it says. So you're supposed to disavow all of this. So Chris, for example, considers himself Catholic, I think, first. He was doing tarot, but I think when he came upon this information and he sees himself as a believer, if he wants to, I think, be honest with God and be true to God and be saved, he had to disavow anything that the Bible speaks against. So he's falling along the guidelines of his faith. Okay? That's what it's saying. 21:17. All practices of magic or sorcery by which one attempts to tame occult powers so as to place them at one's service and have a supernatural power over others, which what God does all the time. So this is sort of strange. Even if this were for the sake of restoring their health, so even if you try to do it for you, for your benefit, are gravely contrary to the virtue of religion. Okay? So if you are someone that is having a lot of pain and a lot of issues, and you have no real recourse, and let's say something magic can help you, you are advised not to do it. You're supposed to bear the pain because at some point it's what God is allowing. And you're supposed to just trust in God that God's going to make it all better. Newsflash, God never makes it better. Okay? These practices are even more to be condemned when accompanied by the intention of harming someone, so baneful work, or when they have recourse to the intervention of demons working with them. Wearing charms is also reprehensible. That's right. You can't be wearing your cross anywhere. You can't be wearing your little beads or your charms anywhere because that also goes against it. Okay, you're not supposed to be wearing charms of any kind. Evil eyes, forget them. The squiggly cane thing is supposed to ward off evil. You're not supposed to wear that either. If you're using the cross as a good luck charm, you're not even supposed to wear that either. That's according to the Catechism of the Council of Trent. That's what it's saying to you. I think it's stupid, but that's what it's saying, okay? Because it's all lumping it under one thing. Spiritism often implies divination or magical practices. The Church, for her part, warns the faithful against it. Recourse to so-called traditional cures does not justify either the invocation of evil powers or the exploitation of another's credulity. Okay? That's what it's telling you. Are you getting this? Okay? Are you understanding what I'm saying? That's what this is saying. Now, someone's saying, well, that's God. That's the Old Testament. But this is something that is being kept imperative through the New Testament. But people want to say things like, well, Christ wasn't like that. And I have to correct you. Because people have this idea that Christ was this loving, peaceful figure. But it's not entirely true. And there's a few instances. Do you remember the part where Christ cursed a tree because it would not produce fruit for him? That was the thing he did. And when there was a woman that I believe was a seer, and she was saying that he was a true God because she had the gift of sight, she was also, I think, reprimanded or not to be trusted either. Because the power that she has to see the identity of Christ, discernment, wasn't something that was given to her by God. It was something that she got from otherworldly spirits or something. So it was right, it was correct, and it was powerful, but because it didn't come from God, it was disavowed. If I find that, I'll probably post it here. So the reason why I mention that is because a lot of us want to sort of consult, well, Christ is different. Christ is not like his daddy. But let's get something straight here. For those practitioners, there are Christians that believe God and Christ are the same thing, because that is the view. They don't really contradict one another. Because Christ did things in a more peaceful, loving nature, he would say, well, he's not like his dad, but they share the same thing. And there is an issue, and later on in Revelations, I believe it is to mention how this is sort of an analogy as to the church and things, how Christ says that he will lay her upon a bed and allow, and will have men enter the room and then rape her. That's a thing that's in the Bible. That's interesting. If I find that, I'll post it up here. But this is the issue why I have an issue with that when it comes to things like, well, Christ is different. But we have to be certain here. In Matthew 5, chapter 5, 17 to 20, it says that Christ came to fulfill the law of the Old Testament. So if the Old Testament called for someone being stoned, someone being killed, Christ says you're supposed to do that. Forgiveness is something that was added later, because even at that point, it's contested as to who wrote who. The personality of Christ tends to change throughout the New Testament, believe it or not, depending on who is writing about Christ. But it says here in Matthew 5, 17 to 20, Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Okay? For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Okay? That's what he's saying. I don't trust him. You can't trust him. He's there to do Daddy's bidding. He had Daddy's blessing. Okay? But this is why it's a lot more political in that nature, because they're trying to gather people. And so they're like, this is a little bit hard. This is a little bit harsh, isn't it? So they try to use this to sort of, soften the blow a bit. But those who have access to the Old Testament, to the laws that were back then, so things that when it comes to things like idolatry, adultery, homosexuality, even things like witchcraft and stuff, Christ was upholding those sort of things. Okay? He's like, we have to keep those laws in place because it's what God established. Okay, so, take that into account. So there's a lot of issues that I have with this, and it is because I think, and we see some people sort of going into the Catholic thing, and I think what I mentioned before about the community is, I believe, a reason for it. When you are part of a group of people, when you're growing up in a family, in a community that is revolving around a religion, and that religion has certain things mentioned in it that one is not supposed to do or, I believe, take part in, then, it sort of becomes this, it's a cult, first of all, but sort of it starts to become a problem when a person starts exhibiting those same abilities and stuff. So then, when you have a person or a family, for example, that is so interwoven into the faith to where it becomes a part of their reality and a part of their identity, you're sort of to be, you're going to be thrown into this sort of, cacophony of issues. I personally don't know, Chris's motivations entirely. He says what he says. I have a whole list here. So, for the past 50 years or so, this is another post he put on. When people have gone to Catholic churches and watched the priests and how they behave and perform the rites, the subliminal message they receive is this isn't serious. Because he feels as though the priests over time sort of don't really believe in what they're doing. And honestly, going to seminary might have a bit of a reason for that, because I sort of start to discover true things about it, which is interesting because if he went to seminary, if he knows about these sort of issues, these contradictions which do exist, and these sort of, contest, these sort of things that sort of conflict, to dive fully into this thing, the only thing that would lead me to believe this is because he probably either got pressure from within the church, or he feels as though he feels strongly, well, I really believe in this, and this is what it tells me how to do, so I have to sort of dispose of this thing and follow him completely because what I'm doing is wrong. And so this is wrong, this is what I'm supposed to do. Even if he had a community of followers in tarot, even if he was doing this thing in the occult circles, according to his core belief system, he has to reject that in order to be a legitimate practitioner of the Catholic faith, to be a legitimate believer. Okay? We don't really believe this. This is dress up and pretend time, and so we often seen a huge drop-off in mass attendance in pretty much every continent besides Africa, and there's reasons for that. There used to be hundreds and thousands of nuns in this country. They ran school, hospitals, orphanages, all gone. Everywhere, parishes are closing. Churches and Catholic schools are being sold. If you go to a church today, the only people you'll find are aging boomers. That is, those who were raised before Vatican II and had this instilled in them. So he's saying that the doctrine that was introduced prior to this moment is partially responsible for why there's this huge disconnect and why there's this huge absence within the Catholic Church and within the Catholic Mass. You might ask, I think the third post on the XP thing, if modernism destroys faith and most of the hierarchy have adopted it to some extent, then why didn't they leave the church too? Well, a few reasons. Some of these people are really cynical. That's an assumption. There's great profit in religion. That is true. And great power, also true, if you play your cards right. Also, even though they don't hold the genuine Catholic faith, they do have a certain belief in God and in themselves. I think the Vatican II reformers really believed that they had a mission from God to improve the religion for the modern world. In this, they were incredibly full of themselves and deceived. So he's saying that because they adopted new ways of doing things to sort of have more people come into the church, because they see that the world is modernizing. They want to keep up with it and to keep people coming into the church. He's saying that by them doing that, they sort of, what's it called? They sort of diluted the waters and the faith. And so the church isn't what it used to be. And so that inherently is the reason why there's no power within the church, no truth, no passion, and why there's ultimately no people there. Another effect of modernism is that it implies that all religions are basically the same. To some extent, they are. If religion is just a subjective experience, which it is, then you can't really question the religion of another group. And that happens within religions. Christianity does this if you're a fundamentalist, and it also happens with Catholicism and Judaism, and if you're a Muslim as well, and other faiths. After all, the witch doctor is also having a subjective experience of God. Also true, but is it God? But what if the doctrines of two different religions contradict each other? If you treat them both as true, then you're effectively saying that they are both false. Exactly. But if you have documents and scriptures that are contradicting each other, which they do exist, what does that tell you? Okay, you went to seminary, you should know. And that it doesn't really matter what anyone believes. And that in a sense is true also, because no one can really prove that their God or their version of God exists. It's all anecdotal, which isn't, objectively verifiable, unfortunately. This is what I absorbed. By this thinking, why not be a pagan? Why not be a tarot reader? Why not make up your own religion from scratch? Why not mix and match different religions? It doesn't matter. And that viewpoint is what I see many folk practitioners use, or people that are Catholic witches or Christian witches are using. They are picking and choosing the things that work for them. And in magic, it's allowed. Magic doesn't care. And your practice is your practice. And if it works for you, awesome. But when it comes to identifying what the person is, who they are with, and the spirits that are associated with that book, with the magic, or whatever you want to call it, gatekeeping or belief in understanding has to be done. But that's not real Catholicism, he says. Real Catholicism teaches that the truths of the faith are objectively real. This is something they have to prove. They are revealed by God and therefore worth dying for. That's the thing, But the problem is that how do you know something is of God? Then you have to go into, you have to do things that not only agree with God's doctrine, but that can be verifiable. Well, this couldn't have happened unless if it was God. Well, then I'd have to ask you for evidence then, because if you're claiming God is real, then you have the burden of proof. You didn't have to go into what you can do to prove that God is acting in your favor and not something else, okay? All that the early Christian martyrs had to do was burn incense to the emperor, and they could have avoided torture and death. But they refused. Japanese Catholics endured centuries of persecution, and all they had to do was to make it stop was tap the sole of their sandal onto an image of Jesus. They refused. The Irish lived under the yoke of the Great Britain and endured terrible hardships to practice their faith. All true, by the way. And all they had to do was become an Anglican. They refused because they had real faith. Today, Ireland has almost totally lost the faith, not because of persecution, but because of Vatican. They're saying that they sort of softened so much because of the introduction of this new doctrine that they just ended up leaving. And they're saying that, he's sort of saying that, well, these people wouldn't die unless if it was true. That is patently false, okay? The Jamestown massacres, for example, Nazi Germany, and other faiths as well. When you have a group of people that believe wholeheartedly that what they believe in is true, they are willing to die and kill themselves for it. The Nazis believed that the Jews were people that deserved to die, that they weren't real humans, okay? They did the same thing to the gays, and there was racism in the blacks. For the longest time, it was believed that, blacks were subhuman, that women were also subhuman in Greek, that they were less than man. They believed that, God gave this doctrine, and it has to be real, because otherwise, why would they die for it, people die for stupid shit all the time. They believe in these cult leaders and shit as well, for the Jamestown Massacre or anything else. These people that believe wholeheartedly in what they are, and what they are perceived to be seeing and things like that. But despite the fact that they show no proof and nothing really comes up out of it, there's no real miracles that take place, And the miracles that supposedly take place can't be tested, so you can't verify whether or not it was real. And, some people can lie and force these and say, well, this thing really happened, so that's what you should believe. And that's a story of many people growing up in America that are in Christian churches and organizations. Since they're a child, the Bible says you need to raise them into the faith. You have to believe in God. You're instructing your children in the ways of the Lord. That is in Scripture. And so you're sort of grooming your child to believe something as if it is real without proving it. And many people have died believing this. When I did my interview, for example, with Captain Cauldron, there was a part of the interview where he mentions where they were doing seances and they had spirits come in. There were spirits of Mormons and spirits of people, Latter-day Saints, and other spirits that believed in God. When they came through, they said that it wasn't at all what I believed in. Okay? That's what they said, according to this. And I pretty much put faith in it. And again, I can't prove it, but that's pretty much a thing here. But if we're being honest, what they're relying on is complete hearsay, complete of what somebody wrote that you can't really prove or verify. None of us were there thousands of years ago, yet you are supposed to believe this because he's old and because he has money. That's pretty much what I'm getting out of this thing. So after that, I'm continuing his sort of thing here. I concluded that no one believed this or took it seriously. Once you accept modernism, not only the dogmas or the faith, but also the morals become relativized. Instead of clear delineations of right and wrong, you have just follow your conscience. Subjectivism, which is all religion is at the end of the day, and control, authoritarianism. Around the same time, I left seminary. A friend of mine who had already been ordained a priest decided to leave our diocese. He ended up going to a sedevacantist seminary in Florida, where he was eventually reordained a priest. When he told our bishop of his decision, our bishop called Rome, and the order came down that my friend should be excommunicated. So much for the welcoming Francis. That's all an act. He couldn't excommunicate the likes of Mick Carrick, but he's happy to do that to traditional priests. So he's sort of saying that, well, they got rid of him because he's not with the new modern movement. They're trying to, like dispose of the old faith and stuff, which is all bullshit or whatever. It's the truth or whatever. That's what I'm getting out of it. When I heard of my friend's decision, I was shocked. This was when I first beginning my tarot journey. I thought all the same things about him that many of you are probably thinking about me now. He's a schismatic, a fundamentalist, crazy, intolerant, and probably racist. But I felt bad for him since I knew he had struggled with some of the same things I had struggled with. About this time 1 year ago, I was doing very well tarot-wise. I was bringing in a lot of money on here. He's aware. He's commented on it. He said he's going to give money back. We'll see if that happens. Getting a lot of praise. Despite all this, I fell into an acute depression. I knew my soul was empty, starved. It felt like a deep chasm inside. I couldn't pray anymore. I had lost the faith and been in sin for a long time by that point. Eventually, I pulled out of it by my own effort, but that experience changed me. Since then, I couldn't help but seeing more and more how deluded so many people are on this app. My faith was still dead, but I was growing increasingly disenchanted with the world and all the beliefs that are peddled on there. Occasionally, I would lash out at things that disturbed me. I think I did at you once. I started doing those tarot reels, which was me basically offering harmless self-help advice through the cards, which the Catechism denounces. Not that different from what you hear in the Vatican II homily. Then everything changed after October 7. I saw how rabid people became, including many on here. My first reaction was to say nothing, but then my conscience was getting to me, so I decided to speak out and condemn anti-Semitism I was seeing. For that I was cursed and attacked by many here. So that really made me fall out of love with this whole scene. It's pretty transparent that people hate Jews because they hate God. Not true. There's reasons for that. I will go into that. I understand what he's saying, but I'll go into that. The Jews gave the world the 10 Commandments, so people who hate God's law have always and will always persecute them. Also, Satan will persecute them. As a Catholic, I pray for their conversion. For who? The Jews to convert to Catholicism or for people to convert to the faith? But I don't hate them or anyone, and any people, have a right to defend themselves when attacked. True. What I was seeing was naked godlessness and evil. This woke stuff is clearly just Marxism repackaged. That's where we get into the bread and butter. It's incredibly destructive. Nothing good can come of it. It's based on and encourages the sin of envy. It put me in distress, so I started praying. I prayed to St. Michael. I prayed the Psalms. Some of you may remember I was sharing the Psalms on here. This brought a certain peace. And for a brief moment, I had a hope that my life would continue. But with me praying these prayers as I saw fit, I was still in the modernist delusion. Still, I couldn't help but be shook at how the hand of God was clearly visible in these events. When I consider the arc of history and how all this is spoken of in the Bible, it rattled me. So this is the issue that I have with too. This is something that's being very apparent for those of you who are paying attention, for those of you that know. So right now, everything that's happening right now when it comes to the Middle East They think that it is the end times because it's mentioned how Israel is going to be turned against by so many nations and they're going to attack Israel because of its faith and things like that. But it doesn't tell you what happened or what Israel is doing at that time. I think it's all bullshit. It is something that was called about thousands of years ago that never happened, which is also taught in seminary. Jesus was wrong about that. But that's what they're going based off of. And that, for example, that this time is where you're going to see a lot of manifestations of evil. That's when the devil's going to be in control. You're going to see a lot of things. They call woke that, but I think there's a huge misunderstanding as to what woke is. What woke is calling out the injustices you see in your society. That's what woke is to wake you up to it. Because there were a lot of injustices and there still are. Okay, just because somebody is gay does not mean they are woke. Just because somebody is black doesn't mean they are woke. A lot of us have traditionalist ideals that have been passed on to us and ingrained into us through grooming that we then adopt as being real. And so we have this idea that America in the past was better and more fruitful because of those traditionalistic ideas. But let me remind you, this is all these evil things are happening because people are sort of leaving God and sort of isolating themselves from the word of the Lord, and that is bullshit. Okay. For example, it was the word of God that called forth the killing of witches, of gays, because they deemed that as evil. But God also killed a lot of children. And in Egypt, for example, one of the plagues was the death of the firstborn. These were innocent people that just grew up in a house, but God didn't care. When God sent his Israelites to attack the tribe of, I think, Canaan, as well as some other ones as well, they were supposed to kill the women, the children, as well as the men. Okay, and these were essentially the same people. And the reason why I say that is because according to archaeological findings, they found that a lot of the Israelite things that they had back then closely resembled to a lot of Canaanite imagery. And they were essentially the same people. And their belief in God or Yahweh was essentially a Canaanite deity that was part of a pantheon of Canaan. Okay, a god of metallurgy. War god or whatever you want to call it. But that's like a different tangent. So there's this belief that these end times are coming and that the world is sort of spiraling down into this chaos because, the second coming is here or whatever, and that it's because people have lost God. Okay, but that's just a horrible take. There's a lot of reasons for that. And part of the issue to what he's saying is because when people are part of a community and they lose it, in an act of rebellion because they felt harmed and rejected by that, they sort of dive deeply into debauchery and things to a point where it becomes very unhealthy. And so they end up being in bad, ways or whatever. And so in order to achieve a type of equilibrium and balance and meaning in their lives, because they feel as though they've lost it, they end up reconverting. And this can sometimes happen to people that sort of adopt witchcraft after they leave. Because they assume, well, I did all these things, but the reason why they did it was because they did it as an act of defiance to what they felt harmed them before. So there's that to consider. When he's talking about these sort of things, it calls to mind the injustices of the 70s, for example, when you have the Stonewall riots that happened in Columbus, Ohio. I live in Ohio. I'm about a few hours from Columbus. And during this time in America, it was illegal to be gay. It was illegal to a lot of things. Even though this is America, it's supposed to respect people's rights, it didn't care. And this is something that a lot of the Christians supported, and I don't have to really explain that to you. But during this time, there were officers that were going into gay clubs, nightclubs, and pulling out gays and putting them into trucks because sodomy and everything else, even though they were in protected spaces, they didn't care. They violated their freedoms. And so a riot broke out, rightfully so, because their rights, their freedoms as Americans, first and foremost, was violated. And now we have certain laws that are being placed by these organizations like the church, by the Catholic, churches and things like that, and by Christians that are violating the rights that are given to us by the Constitution. They could care less of the Constitution. What they care about is not only control, but that this country is right by God. But it was never a country that was for God. It was a country for money. Okay? The founding fathers were, for the most part, Masonic, and they had their own point of God that didn't really have anything to do with the church. And they had to sort of leave the church from England because the church was a monopoly in England, and they had a lot of power and say over things like taxes or anything else, what you were supposed to do. So they came over here for a different life. That was a tangent. I'm sorry about that. But this sort of thing bothers me. He sort of has this idea that, and people don't hate Jews because they hate God. That's a wrong thing to say. I can understand the viewpoint that people don't like Jews because they inherently believe in the things that this God of theirs had proclaimed, which would be, all the bad things that they do to, disparage groups, disenfranchised groups, whether you're gay, whether you're a witch, whether you're any other religion or whatever. Their God denounces that and has done horrible things against them. So if they believe them, they associate with them with the God. But there are Jews that are, fine, that they are normal, that they are, relatively cool people. And so some people hate them for that because they try to, put their faith into law, into the culture and everything else. And some have done that. But to paint them all as this group to be, killed or whatever is lunacy. And so I understand the things that are happening in the Middle East. I do not agree with the policies at all. I think they need to fucking stop. I am for Palestine, I want to say, just because of the things that I'm seeing. And I'm not saying that the plights of the Israelites are not valid. There are certainly terrorist groups in there. We're not condoning the actions of Hamas, of what they did. It's deplorable, okay? But this isn't the Palestinian people. Are there defectors? Are there radicals? Of course there are, okay? But the majority of people aren't engaging in that sort of thing. And those are the ones that are being affected mostly by this war. But this is also affecting the Jews in Israel as well. They don't agree with the current government in Israel. Netanyahu is a completely super right-wing person. And the whole Zionist movement is sort of trying to implement the religious law into the secular laws that are within Israel. And they're having issues with that right now. And the Christians over here are aligning themselves with Israel because they believe the same God, the same thing with the Catholics. So there's this huge conglomerate of faith and believers that are doing these things. And they're trying to ensure things are in a certain way because they want to make sure they're there when the big guy comes. He won't, by the way. And they're sort of nervous and they're scared for their lives and they're scared for the salvation of their country. But it's not their job to save anyone. People don't need saving. What they need is help. That's what they need, which, sometimes the church doesn't really do, unfortunately. So I know it's a bit of a rant, but this is absolutely true. And I'm tired of seeing this bullshit. It's insane. Okay? This has to stop. And I don't want to get into a whole tangent about it, even though I already am. But it's something that I think worrying because they're becoming a bit more radical. I'm talking about the believers right now. Because they are convinced that by what they are seeing is confirmation of scriptures. And if scriptures is being confirmed, that means the laws that are associated with it, whether Old Testament or New Testament, have to be followed and they have to be implemented and they have to be enforced by law. Okay? That's the issue that we're having. This sort of, it's a religious war. It's what it is. And and it's fitting, considering the fact that they serve a god of war, of metallurgy. It's always been conflict, it's always been violence. God has ordered his people to go into other tribes, into other nations, and to destroy them. And if they didn't do what God wanted, God would deliver them into the hands of their enemies. And then God would say, the reason why you are here is because you didn't want to kill those people. You didn't want to listen to me. Now you have to bear, the brunt of your actions. You have to bear the results of that. The issues you're having, it's your fault and not mine. I mean, sure, I put you into that problem. I let them, take you in and stuff. I let them rape you and do whatever you want. But it's your own fault because you didn't want to listen to me. You didn't want to choose me, despite the fact that we're told that God is a selfless, all-loving being. That's mentioned, I think, in that first part in the section 1 in the Catechism. So how does an all-loving being allow that to happen? If he truly is selfless, then why not just save people because it's what it wants to do, because it is loving and selfless? We do that for each other, but this God demands worship and servitude. It is in the Catechism. Okay, so I sort of, divulged enough about that sort of thing. I sort of, went everywhere. But this is something I think has to be addressed. Now, in response to Chris is doing and everyone's reactions to it, he is completely within his right as a believer, as a practitioner, to do whatever the fuck he wants. Unfollow him, do whatever. He's prepared for it. Was he right in what he did? It's completely his choice, his life choice. We have no say in what a person chooses to do. Are they a piece of shit for doing it? For saying what he said and how he said it? Yes. But it comes from this fundamentalist view. It comes from the view of this Catholic Church. Is what his God believes. And if he wants to associate himself with his God, he has to believe in the same thing and do what this God is demanding. If you're a practitioner, if you are, if you are following Lucifer, if you are following, Keranos, if you're following any other kind of deity, Aphrodite, whatever it is, if they have certain principles that they live by, that they want you to live by, those people are seen by what they do. Actions speak louder than words. How can you tell a person is a devotee of Hecate? How can you tell a person is a devotee of Apollo? Look at what they do in respect to their gods. Look at what they do. Look at what they say, how they act, all of these things. You don't have to use a god in your work, but that's sort of what that goes. Some witches don't even use deities. Some people rely on ancestors, but even that is something that is denounced and that is, strictly, called against by the Catechism of this Council of Trent, by the Church itself. But this is no secret. And this is something, just to a close, I think, because I've gone on quite a long time. My first proper hour episode, but I'm saying this out of love, and I'm saying this out of, worry and concern, because I see how these things are progressing. But I'm not putting my energy into that. I'm still doing me. And, let's say if things go for the worst, we have all of eternity to think about these sort of things, But, those of you who are unsure about what you are doing, of your faith, continue to practice. If it works for you, awesome. But then you also have to account for what you believe in and how is this related to, the church that you live in. Now, some people want to, separate God from the church, but God established the church, and his doctrine, from what you believe, is what the church follows. So if God is calling for the death of people that, he doesn't like, and if he is calling for things that you are supposed to practice, a person that is involved with that deity has to follow those things according to the doctrines from which the deity is, speaking. It's a belief structure. So I understand a lot of us perhaps that are in these circles don't try to dismiss it, because it is a huge part of their core. It's how they grew up. And if your family is cool with it, awesome. But there are some people where, for example, if you're part of a group or an organization and your family has adopted it as their identity, and you do something that is against the identity of that people, it's going to cause conflict. And so then you have to then make a decision as to whether or not you're going to, out of respect for your family, out of the communication and out of the closeness and the association you have with your community, if you want to remain part of the family, part of the community, part of the church, part of God's kingdom, then you have to reject that and toss that aside. That is what Chris did. That is his belief system. He is right to believe in what he wants, but it is his decision. Okay? I am surprised because, he does his research. He knows of people like Dr. Bart Ehrman, Dr. McDonald, Dr. Ellen Page, and other people that do extensive history in the past with evidence and archaeological findings that sort of find errors in scripture. I think it's interesting how he sort of, he knows these sort of things, but he's still going along with it. So I think as it may be something related to the community that he is in. I don't know, okay? But judging by what I've seen, his reactions, by what he reads or whatever, I will post some of them here or here, depending. But it's something that I think I want all of us to come to realize. If you are a magical practitioner that is incorporating, Christian motifs in what you are doing, but it works for you, splendid. But I think you have to really think about what you truly believe and what it really does for you. Is the power you are manifesting theirs or your own? Okay? You're the one doing the work. If it wasn't for what you were doing, this wouldn't happen. So you're already a huge catalyst in what has to happen for that spell to manifest. I'm not telling you to not believe. I'm telling you to think critically. Whatever power you have, you can find somewhere else. And it's completely legitimate. But some people, because they don't want to lose their families, their friends, their jobs, and even their church community, they tend to sort of push back on these things and leave it aside. And I don't agree with it. I lived in it for a long time. I've gained a lot of perspectives. I've researched many things over time. And there's a lot of things that I know and things that I think about regardless, but I have no fear of death, really, after, going into this thing. And what I've come to realize is that the power that I possess is mine and mine alone. And the things that I invoke are other powers that are there to help me in my endeavors. Okay? If I truly wish for it. So, a little tag here, just to whatever. I urge all of you to sort of, watch the Red Text podcast. They are beautiful people. I love both of them. Voga, you are fucking stunning, bitch. Yes, queen. I love it. And right, cute little biscuit. Oh my God, I could just I can't say it here. But no, honestly, I love both of you. I wish you both the best, all the well. I do this as an informative thing. I hope I was sort of, well, relatively consistent with what I was saying. I had everything in order in my mind and sort of just went out the window. But I'm sort of, doing this to help you. As a secondary help, there are some channels I think I'm going to recommend that you should probably look into. One such channel is called Mythvision. And it is a channel that is dedicated to breaking down the myths and the beliefs of the Christian faith. They have people, they have doctors, they have ex-pastors and bishops that speak to Derek. He's like the main host of that show. And they bring forth evidence of the past, either disprove or prove or whatever it is. They have debates on there. They talk about the understandings. They talk about the cultures of the ancient times, what they did, the similarities, the comparisons they had to other cultures during that time, how there's a lot of similarities between, Christ and other deities, things like that. Bart Ehrman has taught on that show, which is someone that Chris references. Dr. Ellen Pagel, I think, or Page, something like that, is also on that show. Dr. I think Donis McDonald or something like that, he's also on that show. I think Gnostic Informant is another channel you can also watch that discusses those certain things. They have Mythvision, Gnostic Informant. I think Paulogia or something like that. I can't remember all of them. But the ones that I will post here for you to see, okay? Those are what I encourage all of you, because we have to be informative. To have power over the enemy is to know the enemy. I'm not saying there are enemies, but I'm saying if you want a good comeback, if you want further understanding as to why they do what they do, how they believe, watch them, look at those channels, get a Bible if you want. It'll burn a little bit, but once you get past it, then you can read it fully, okay? But those are some suggestions I give all of you to do. Super simple, easy. Derek is... He's a joy to watch. He is very cute. You will enjoy watching him, trust me. But they bring on a lot of people on there. People that were Mormon, people that were Jehovah's Witnesses, people that were Jews as well, that know their cultures, that know everything else. People that went to these places, that archaeological digs, Egypt. Very beautiful channel. I recommend all of you to go watch it, okay? So without further more delay, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this was very, very informative for you. I hope I didn't upset you guys too much. I apologize, maybe I rambled a bit, but I hope any information that I sort of gave out was, I believe, received greatly. I hope it helped you all out. I want all of you to, keep in your studies. Make sure that you are practicing safety, whether it is sex or magic. Make sure that you are, diving deep into your craft, but also taking time for yourself. You don't have to do magic all the time. You really don't. It sort of helps you to just, decompress and do it when you absolutely need to. Okay? I encourage all of you, to go out there, become more informed about these certain things, about why they think the way they do, the world or whatever, but don't let it bog you down. Don't let it bring, evil or darkness to your life. These are things that are outside of whatever. But if what you are doing can help improve your life, and if what you do can help others, I encourage you to do the same, okay? I urge all of you to go out there, and to remember that we are part of a community, that we are part of a family, that we are part of a group, that we are seekers not only of power, but also truth and knowledge, okay? Remember that I care for you, that there are people here that care for you, that there are other people outside that are in need of help, that aren't sure what to do, what to believe. And if you have some information that could help them, offer them that information, okay? But yes, so I want all of us to make sure that, we are practicing, the appropriate levels of our belief systems. Oh, class, for example, we have an exam that is due, I think, in 2 weeks. I hope all of you guys are doing it. It's going to be on the subject of mermaids and sirens. And I believe the potency that the scales have and the saliva, believe it or not, because mermaid saliva can be rather potent if you get it in the right vial, okay? It's not always willing. They may not like you, but they have a different reaction when it comes to magical practitioners. You may have to be a bit more apprehensive when you're approaching them, okay? Make sure, you are washing your hands, that you are keeping safe. It is still cold. The flus are out there. The Rona is out there as well. Make sure you are, if you need to wear a mask, do that. Make sure you get some fresh air. Make sure you're eating healthy. New Year's resolutions are very important. If you're trying to lose weight, make sure to look out for calories. Make sure to cut out bread, carbs a little bit as well. Try to eat a bit more greens. Drink more water, Our bodies are not only temples, but they are wells of magic and power. So, without further delay, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you then. Okay? Goodbye. Where did I put my thing? I don't know.